Hi, I'm Brooke Hernandez with Saw.com. I have Justin Mitchell, CEO and acquirer of Yak.com. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm doing good. Excited to talk with you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I know you are busy, especially during this time with your company. So let's get to it. Pretty much, what is the name of your company and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we are Yak. We started out as Yak Chat, and actually the original name was Yelling Across Cubicles. That's where we get YAC from. So kind of nice little origin story there. We wanted to drop that chat moniker, and we had Yak.chat, and a lot of people don't know that .chat is even a TLD that they can go visit. So yeah, getting Yak.com was super important to us. So Yak is an asynchronous meeting tool for teams. So we're an audio first messaging platform. Think of, sending voice messages in WhatsApp or iMessage, but for B2B. So you're sending 30 seconds of your voice, maybe a couple minutes of your voice plus what's on your screen. You're sending that off to your team. They're able to reply on their own time. Very similar to this Zoom call that we're on right now, but everybody gets to do it whenever and however they want to instead of having to show up at a predetermined time for a meeting.
That's great, especially right now with everything going on and everyone having to get used to working remote. Being able to allow people to have that kind of option on time frame that works for them is a great idea for a product.
Absolutely.
So, when did your company first conceptualize your brand, and really what were the major factors that you were trying to portray to your customers?
Yeah, November 2019, we were yelling across cubicles. I think when we initially launched, we put some periods in between YAC, and it was an acronym at the time. And then we just got used to calling it Yak. And so it kind of naturally became Yak about a month later. And, we've been that way ever since. A big part of the brand was that it was supposed to be very approachable, kind of easy to pronounce. We really wanted to verb it. So just like you Google something
Right.
or hop on a Zoom, like there's a way that these words just become naturally extensions of your vocabulary. Let me Slack you something. Let me WhatsApp you this. We wanted yak to become the same type of verb. And so it was very important to us to be easy to say, that it fit with a lot of other kind of verbs that you're already using. We already had actually a brand called BRB, literally be right back, BRB.
Right.
I was kind of yak for the younger generation. And at one point in time, we actually thought about completely rebranding Yak to BRB because the domain was going to be easier to acquire. But as we started kind of playtesting this with everybody that we were talking to, it was very clear that it was difficult to say, let me BRB you. That didn't
Right.
flow quite as well as, hey, did you get my yak? Hey, let me yak you. Well, I've been yakking all day long, right? So these, the words were much easier to say. And that was a huge part of what we wanted in our brand was a way for us to kind of like normalize the use of the word, colloquially in normal language. And so, that was a big thing that we had going into the brand discussion, as well as this idea of being top of mind. We wanted it to be a word that people got used to. And the domain, yak.com, was a huge part of this idea of if I just tell you yak and you need to go find that somewhere, we need you to be able to Google it. We need you to be able to type it into a browser and it shows up, right? Nobody's going to know to type in .chat. And so that's why the .com was super important to us as well, because it is a non-English word. YAC is not, something that's definable in the Merriam-Webster. And so we needed
Right.
them to be able to easily find it on the web.
I think you guys really thought that through. And like you said, it really is that kind of verb that you use where you're just like, well, I want to go, we need to just yak. Or like you said with the Slack, I think you guys really hit the nail on the head with that idea of the verb being used
Yep.
when they're discussing your guys's product and service. So when you guys were making this big decision, which we kind of compare almost to like naming your firstborn child, I know you kind of went through a little bit of what the process was, but kind of take us through the steps really that your company took when really making that final decision to pick the name and going through that.
We did a similar exercise with the logo as well. Kind of put a bunch of names out there on the table. We typically will do like a Twitter poll sometimes to even kind of like test the waters and see what other people are thinking. But really for Yak, it was kind of the first attempt. I said, I want, we actually have a screenshot in our Slack of me saying, I just want a brand that says yelling across cubicles. That's what I said, is I wanted to have a brand that like exuded that action. And
Right.
one of our designers was like, Yak, YAC. And I was like, oh my gosh, that like was right there in front of me the whole time. I had no idea. So I will say that that in particular was a very simple, almost like instant branding. But we brand stuff all the time. We just built a project over the weekend. We called it Orca. We went back and forth on all kinds of names. We really liked this idea of pods, and whales have pods, and you could join a pod or you could share a pod. So there's all this like nomenclature that came out of the word orca. And then we thought about rebranding that for like younger generation, because orca is the business unit, and now we have a brand called koi, which is just the fish, and
Gotcha.
it's basically the same logo but orange, and so we do go through like a whole process of thinking about what's the image that we want to put out. What do we want your first few thoughts to be? Do we want it to be playful? Do we want it to be serious? Do we want it to be enterprise? Do we want it to be, indie? Like there are even projects, actually Yak, when we started it, it was called Yelling Across Cubicles. And then we did the abbreviation YAC. Even the UI, we specifically built it to look bad. It's kind of a weird thing, but we only spent 4 days on the initial project. It was just a hackathon project. And so the UI and the brand was supposed to look kind of like grungy in a way. Like we
Right.
wanted it to look like we threw it together and just like this was the cool thing that we came up with that was not serious. It was not meant to be like long-term play at all. And that's why like we had a graduation point where we removed the periods, made it all lowercase instead of all uppercase. Like we started to slowly pare away that kind of image of independent DIY hackathon and make it into a real startup brand. And so yak.com is this massive moment of going from like hackathon project to fully funded VC startup. And a lot of that had to do with the name. And we do that with a lot of our products, is think through like what's the first thing we want someone to think when they land on this web page. And what we wanted with YAC, or Yelling Across Cubicles, is we wanted them to think, hey, they threw this together for fun in 4 days, because that's literally what happened.
What you guys did.
Now we want them to think this is an enterprise startup, used by major companies all over the world. And those two brand images are very different, and your name has a lot to do with that. The logo has a lot to do with that. Domain has a lot to do with that. And
Right.
so we're thinking through that every time we name a product. And that's part of the branding exercise, is that kind of like gut reaction. What's that initial, I know what I hear and see when I look at that brand. And we do that a lot with a lot of the brands that we're building. Even when from kind of our design agency side, So Friendly, we have a branding questionnaire that we will send off to our clients. And that branding questionnaire is, look at these two images. Which image do you like better? Which font do you like better? Which color do you like better? And that doesn't actually mean that we'll make your logo that color or that font. It just gives us an idea of like where your mental state is with your brand and what you're kind of looking for. And that's so important going into a branding opportunity, is where you are and what your alignment is and what your customer type is, who's your ideal user. All of that stuff is being asked, and all of that goes into a brand. And I could go on and on about this forever, because I truly believe that branding is one of the most paramount things in the entire world when it comes to product design. Because if you can sell somebody at that first click, just like that first moment they land on that web page, then you've got that hook in, and you can start to reel them in with copy, design, features, whatever. If they don't like the brand, though, they're not going to get any further on the website to see anything else.
Oh, completely agree. Completely agree. That's one of the things that we always talk about, is how having that brand, even on domain, what is it you're trying to portray? Because that is one of the most important things when they first see it. What's their gut reaction? Because the gut reaction is going to almost make them whether they want to go and, like you said, get more information of what the service is, what the company is, or if they're just going to say, nope, let's move on to the next and see if they work better.
Yep.
So who is really your clientele that you are going after, and what benefits do you think the new domain is providing or will provide for you?
Yeah, our ideal customer is either like a small startup or an engineering or design team inside of a larger enterprise or startup. And The brand name, the branding, and the domain has a lot to do with who we're attacking and kind of going after. And those are typically people that need to get approval from somebody, right? Whether it's a CEO or an IT team. And so that brand, that domain, all of that has to look legit. And legit in a sense of this is a real company that I can trust, but also that, hey, they look like they have some money behind them. They're not going away anytime soon. This is someone that we could go through the effort of vetting and getting into the company. One of the biggest things when I was working kind of on the agency side and going through these large enterprises, there's a lot of effort on the IT side to whitelist an app or a product into a bigger company. And a lot of the IT folks just don't want to go down that train if it's something that might not be around in 6 months. And so our .com is really this, it's a clout chaser in some ways. Like it's this idea of us saying like, hey, look at us, we're serious, right? Like this is no longer an indie project. That .com says to our brand, we are a big company, a little bit bigger than our own boots, right? It's a chest pounding moment of saying, look at us, we're one of the big guys, even if we're
Right.
not. We only have 7 full-time employees, right? But it helps give that appearance of we're not going anywhere. You can trust us. This is a legitimate website. I think a lot of people, especially if you think about maybe an older generation of people that are inside of an IT department, are going to look at that and go, a .chat domain? What are these guys, like hack the internet? Like what's a .chat domain? That's not a
Right.
thing. I've heard of .com and .io. That's it, right? And so it does help kind of soften that blow when you bring something into that IT department. And for us, also a 3-letter domain, right? Those are
Right.
hard to come by. It comes with some level, some modicum of, cash money was spent. And again, it helps that brand kind of get past that initial oomph into an IT department to say, hey, these guys look like they're investing in themselves. One thing that I've always said to other startups is, your website is akin to just like your storefront if you had a retail store. And if that was messy or dirty, didn't look like it had been cleaned in a really long time, no one's going to go buy your clothes in your store. And the same can be said about a website. If it's not being taken care of, if it's not up to date, if it's not well branded, if it doesn't work on mobile, whatever the thing might be, that's essentially your storefront. And at the end of the day, your domain plays a very large factor in that. I would probably, say it's akin to the street that you're on, right? There are
Right.
certain streets that people just don't want to go down because we know that's not a great street and we're not going to go shop on that street. And if your shop is on that street, you're just not getting the foot traffic. And for us, having that main street in our domain is a way to say we're here, we're legitimate, we paid the extra money to get on the safe street. And there's not to say that there's anything wrong with a non.com domain, but there is an inherent bias in the marketplace. So when we're looking at that IT manager or that engineer or that creative director, our brand name says, hey, we're legitimate, we're a big company, we're coming for you, and we would love to help you out. And a lot of that has to do with just image. And as fickle as that might seem, it's the facts of life. You have to appear like you are the big guy to get in that room.
Right. And it gives, like you said, the credibility. That's the factor that it really makes and shows is you're now this credible company that they're like, oh, okay, they, like you said, they have the money, they have the investment in this. We need to take the time to discuss it with them. So makes perfect sense. And what advice, I mean, you gave a little bit just then, but what really advice would you give to a startup or even a new company that's looking to rebrand? What would be kind of your go-to on it?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is investing in your customers. Find out who your ideal user is, talk to them. That's a big first step is just talking to your users. Say, hey, we've got 3 brand names. Which of these resonates with you the most, right? Talk to 15 different people and put that stuff out there. But I think in general, the biggest thing that you're going to want is something that's easy to pronounce, easy to spell, and easy to naturally, organically find on the internet. One thing that we've done really well with Yak, and I think part of it is due to us being very loud on social media, but we have gotten to the point with Yak where it is a household name. We're getting mentioned in articles. We're on these like org charts of top remote tools. And really part of that is the ability to just like remember that word. You know that name. It doesn't sound like another brand. It doesn't look like another brand. We have an easily findable URL. You can Google the name and we pop up. And a lot of that has to do with making a strong branding decision up front to not spell it weird, not, put an accent mark in there, not have a strange TLD, right? So like there's all these things that really help you. And what we found for sure is that the more organic traffic that you can get is just the less ad spend, the less education you have to do, the less effort you have to have in bringing people to your website. And that starts with having a brand name that's easy to share, easy to find, easy to say, and easy to search for.
You hit the nail on the head on that one, man. I mean, everything you said was just the brand, everything. It's just exactly what you need for even organic traffic. Like you said, I think people forget that that's a really big way to not have to spend so much money on marketing and on ad is you might have to invest a little more on a domain, but you have them coming straight to your site and not having to Google and possibly go to a competitor or any nature of that beast. So
In fact, the domain purchase on our end is a marketing expense. That's the way we build it against our runway, is that if we spend X amount of dollars up front, that means that we don't have to spend for the lifetime of owning this company marketing dollars to make up for how you find us online. It's an upfront fee that prevents years and years and years of extra marketing spend trying to battle against a bad, website domain.
exactly. So, few little bonus questions, last ones. I love hearing I've read, but the fun and interesting story on how you guys found your company, the hackathon.
Yeah.
I find that's a fascinating way for a company to kind of just all of a sudden be created and start. So please, if you don't mind, give that
Yeah.
that backstory.
Absolutely. I love talking about this because I think at the end of the day, the message is hope. And I think that's really cool. We're based in Florida. We're not your typical Silicon Valley company. We didn't have venture capital connections. We didn't know a bunch of investors. I didn't graduate from Stanford. So we don't fit the bill of your kind of typical funded startup. And I think that's awesome. And, why it's awesome is because it just resonates with everybody else in the same situation. That dude in Ohio that's building something, right?
Right.
Like he can get funding. It's possible for that startup to, build. And I love talking to other founders and saying like, look, I love what you're building. Here's a formula. Like this worked for us. So the background on our story is we started this out of our design agency, So Friendly. We had no intentions of launching a startup. I've done startups before. I, I didn't want to do that. Um, Startups mean no sleep, long nights, lots of work, lots of not getting paid as well. And so I didn't want to do that. I had a stable job at my design agency. We built this thing as part of the Product Hunt Hackathon in November. Thanksgiving weekend, kind of corralled the team together, said, I've got an idea. Let's build something cool out. Started out as kind of walkie-talkie. You could click on somebody's face and audio just blasted out of their computer. While cool, very distracting and annoying, but it worked for the hackathon. We built this thing. We really found like this niche in this audio voice centric messaging system and thought, well, no one is building something that's audio first, voice first, and is centered around this idea of how do I bring a remote team together without forcing them to be on meetings all day long. And so we started playing a little bit more. We upgraded the brand a little bit, actually made a logo, made a website. These things didn't even exist when the hackathon launched. We didn't even have a logo for it. And so we started building it out a little bit more. And then out of the blue, while we were in Las Vegas for CES, I got mentioned on Twitter. I looked at my phone, and it is two people that I've never heard of. I don't follow either of these people. But it says, at Adam Draper, this seems like a very easy pivot for at my name, Justin. And it came from a guy named Aiden. And I just look at it and I scroll up and he says, is anybody building like an audio centric social media network? And I went, we're not, but Aiden's not wrong. Like it would be an easy, path to eventually go to a social network for voice. And so I replied and I said, yeah, sounds great. I'd love to chat. And within 5 minutes, Adam Draper, big VC out in the Valley, his dad has this huge VC fund. Their whole family, they're all VCs, is on the phone with me saying, I really dig what you're doing. I'd love to give you some money to, build this thing out further. And I'm sitting there in my hotel room with my two co-founders going, man, we should get like a pitch deck together, form a company, do the basic, build a website, like the basic things that you
It's
would
the
have.
basic things that need to show that we actually are doing something.
But previously, you'd have to have that ahead of a call with a venture capitalist,
Right.
not like after you get the call. And yeah, it was just kind of a serendipitous moment of, I can only assume Aiden found the app on the product hunt launch, happened to download it, happened to think it was cool, happened to see this tweet from Adam, happened to reply and mention me, and I happened to see it and immediately jump into the thread. All these things combined, and a couple months later, Adam called me back and said, don't take my silence as me being on the fence. I'm definitely interested in investing. I've actually been on the side going off and pulling another investment group together, BetaWorks, out of New York City. I'd like them to co-invest with me. Now, at this time, BetaWorks had just invested in my favorite podcast company and my favorite podcast creation app, and they had sold to Spotify. So BetaWorks is pretty big for us, and we just heard this whole story, and we're like, oh my gosh, like that would be amazing. That's like a dream come true for an audio platform, is like the kings of audio to invest in my platform. Alongside this, someone else on Twitter, another VC, had tweeted out that he was looking for a product that had high resolution communication. That was what he called it. And so I read his blog post and I replied to him with a Loom video, actually, which is funny because a lot of people consider Loom to be a competitor to us. And I said, dude, we're building literally this. This is like you described our app in your blog. 5 minutes later, we're in our DMs. We hopped on a call and he's asking to invest. So we raised our entire pre-seed round off Twitter, people I'd never met before. And when we went back to do a seed round of investing, we raised an entire $1.5 million entirely off of Twitter. I'd never met a single one of these investors. It actually took like a year to even shake hands with some of these guys. Adam invested having never met us in real life. We met him a year later, and that was the first time we'd ever actually met in person. So a lot of this is credit to, remote and this idea of being able to meet someone on the internet and give them money, believe in what they're doing without actually shaking hands. And, I do thank Adam for being the one to really kick that off. But a year later, we're raising 1.5 million completely off of Twitter. We were actually 50K short for our round. And I was so mad. I'm thinking, how could I possibly be 50K short for $1.5 million? And so I go on Twitter and I see this guy that tweets out, man, it's really annoying when a startup says they're oversubscribed and I can't invest in their startup. So I reply to that guy and I say, hey, we're undersubscribed. I'd love to have your money. He replies and says, oh, that's so funny. Sorry, but we're not interested. But another dude DM'd me within 10 minutes and said, I want in. How much do you need? Let's do this. And we closed 50K from that guy inside of 24 hours. So it is just unbelievable what being transparent and open and just battle crying your brand out on the internet can really do for you. And I think that that passion and that openness to just say, we need help. We're in Florida. I don't have VC connections. I'm just going to tell you up front, yo, I'm trying to raise. Do you want in on this deal? And that resonated with a lot of people, I think. And they liked that earnestness and openness to say, yeah, we're actually very interested in what you're doing. I'm glad, that you're being so loud. And I always like to say, I've never reached out to a single investor. Even that tweet, that guy never got back to me, but some other person saw that and by proxy came in and closed with us. And I think it's really cool that we didn't have to go knock on doors and send a bunch of cold emails, that just by being so brash and loud about what we were building, that people started to flock to us just kind of by proxy. And I think that's really neat because it proves that if you are just holding that torch for your brand nonstop, that people will notice and they will come around that camaraderie and say, wow, I really love that you're so passionate about what you're building. How can I get involved? And that's kind of always been our story is, the little guys from a small town in Florida. We're actually the largest cow operation in the Eastern US in my St. Cloud town, are able to build a multi-million-dollar startup because of the power of Twitter. So yeah, that's our story. It's neat. And I think it's reproducible. I had a lot of hacks that I did along the way. When we were raising, I changed my Twitter bio to currently raising for our seed round. and then I would follow an investor on Twitter, and then Twitter auto recommends like a new person based off of who you just followed. And so I'd literally sit there and just spam the follow button, following hundreds of VCs a second. And what's cool is since they get a follow notification, they go then look at my bio. My bio says currently raising our seed round for @Yak, right? And they're able to actually click into that and go, oh, I'm interested in this. And that was my way of doing a cold outreach, was just saying like, hey, look at me, right? And that was it, you know? And it was enough to get people to come in and actually talk to us.
But see, that's what I love about that story is the thinking outside the box. It's not the, oh, we're going to go down the normal road that everyone is saying that we need to do.
Yep.
You guys went and were like, look, we don't have that as really an opportunity. So here we go. Here we are. We're passionate. We have tenacity. Now let's see what we can do. And it shows through being able to actually have your brand and be successful that it can happen. People just have to kind of think in different ways sometimes. If the one opportunity isn't there for you, you go in the other way.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and going over this. I love hearing about your company. I love seeing where it's going. I love all of it. But the most important question to me, Justin, the most important is, would you use saw.com again to acquire a domain?
Absolutely. It was a great process. I think you and I had a lot of fun going back and forth with the owner of the domain for sure. And it was a good process, very smooth. I was unable to get in contact with the owner myself at all. And Brooke, you were really the only way that we could even get into contact with them. So it was a great process, much smoother than I expected it to be. We were on a bit of a tight timeline, and Saw came through and actually really tightened up that timeline for us and got us to our domain acquisition faster than we actually expected. And we were able to actually launch it in time for our big launch online.
Well, thank you so much. I love hearing that. Love that I was able to be a part of that. And as like I said, I will watch you guys continue grow and just wish you guys all the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Have a good one.